up your engine! Today I'm going to rate American cars from worst to best. And now I'm only talking about gasoline and diesels. I'm not talking about electric cars. That'll be a completely different video later. Now, number 3 on the list, which is the worst, is, no surprise, Chrysler. Or today I should say, Fiat Chrysler. Now, my grandfather was a mechanic too. And he didn't like Chryslers all those decades ago. I remember one day a customer came in a 60s Chrysler. He said, it's not riding right. My grandfather checked it, said, you need 4 shocks. And the customer said, how could that be? He said, I've only got 5,000 miles in this car. Well, they put crappy shocks when they built them. We put better aftermarket ones on, and those lasted over 50,000 miles. But those original ones, they were crap because Chryslers make them like crap because it's cheaper to make it that way, and they figured they're going to make more profit. And as time went on, they got crappier and crappier. Chrysler goes bankrupt. The government has to bail them out. Then Chrysler said, oh, we paid it back. Not really. Let's look at the figures here. The government gave Chrysler $12.5 billion. They sold the interest, the government, for $11.2 billion. So we taxpayers lost $1.3 billion in the deal. This is supposed to be private enterprise. Why do we have to keep these people afloat? Ford didn't get bailed out. Fiat was obviously thinking, well, now we can sell our Fiats in the United States. We'll have those Chrysler dealerships. Well, how did that work out? The last I heard, Fiat's talking about pulling out selling Fiat cars in the United States. They left decades ago because they made crap. They're still making crap. Nobody's buying it. You might as well pull out of the United States yet again. Of course, they own Chrysler. They're not going to stop selling Chryslers. But to give you an example, Fiat spent a ton of money years ago selling the Fiat 500. You saw the ads where the Fiats would come under the ocean and then come at the American shores. Well, one of my viewers rightfully pointed out to me that all the Fiat 500 sold in the United States were made in Mexico. So he said, the baloney on them coming under the oceans and coming at the shores, they should have them floating over the Rio Grande in inner tubes or something. Because they were all made in Mexico. Not exactly a bastion of quality manufacturing if you know anything about building just about anything these days. I had a customer buy a starter that was made in Mexico last month. Thing lasted 2 days and it burned itself out. Not the most quality things in the world, not a smart idea to have Italian Fiats made in Mexico then sold in the United States. At one point they sold like 50-something thousand of them in a year. Last year they sold, I guess, less than 1,500, and they're not selling them in the United States anymore, the 500s, but they're talking about pulling all their brands out. And I say, good. You should have never brought them back again. Didn't you realize the first time we don't like them? Now, Chrysler quality's been going downhill for decades anyways. Fiat took over, it went even further down. Now, strangely enough, when Daimler had it, it started to go up a little for some of the products because they were using German transmissions that were much better than the crap that Chrysler had been using, but all that's gone now because they're not affiliated with Daimler-Benz anymore. They're affiliated with Fiat. And if anybody knows anything about Fiats, mechanics for decades have called them Fix It Again Tony, because they break all the time and you got to keep fixing them. Times have not changed. They still deserve that acronym. And speaking of names, they try tricking you. You see those ads for the Jeep Renegade. Renegade! Oh, you're getting a Jeep Renegade. No, you're not. That is a Fiat 500 all-wheel drive vehicle made in Italy. Has nothing to do with actual Jeeps. They're taking the name Jeep so they can sell Fiats to you. Do a little research before you buy one of those things. They are rolling piles of junk. I had a customer buy one. They told me it was the worst vehicle they ever bought. It used to be Dodge Ram. Now Ram is its own brand, Ram. Even though they're owned by Fiat, they're trying to push it away. Well, we're not part of Fiat Chrysler. We're Ram. The saying goes, what's in the name? Not much in that case. I had a customer with one the other day. Had 30,000 miles and the wheel bearing was shot already. They've had a problem with the design of the Hemi engines that I talked about earlier, where the cams used to be closer to the crankshaft so oil would lubricate them. They moved it up higher. Then at low RPMs, they go dry and the lifters and the cams go bad and it costs you $5 grand to replace them. They've made nothing but boner ideas. And when Fiat joined the crew, hey, it was like, here comes another stooge. They only need one more partner and they can be the three stooges. And from what I've read, that PSA, they're still talking about merging with Fiat Chrysler and be Fiat Chrysler PSA. Whew, then we really got the three stooges going at it. So really, if you value your money, stay away from Fiat Chrysler products. They just do not hold up over time. And sometimes that time isn't that long. Sometimes it's less than a year or maybe a couple of years. They just do not have the quality. You get a company that's always going into problems, going bankrupt, borrowing money from people. That's a bad thing. That's not a good thing. That tells you they're not making a quality product. Don't buy one. don't be fooled by all the hype. Now, number 2 on the list, no surprise again, is GM. Hey, they're not quite as bad as Chrysler, but they're not doing so hot either. Like Chrysler, GM went bankrupt. And here's the figures on that. The United States government invested $51 billion in GM. Later, they sold their interest for $39.7 billion, meaning that we taxpayers lost $11.3 billion that we gave to GM. Now they're trying to act like, oh, they paid it back. No, they didn't. We paid that, and they continue to make junk. It's kind of insult to injury, okay? We gave them that money. Maybe they'll make things better. They just kept the money. And a lot of that stuff is stock buyback. It's more a stock market thing for the higher level people to make a profit. It has nothing to do with the actual operating of the company in many cases. It's just a profit thing. A lot of times they get that money and just buy back the stock to make the stock price go up so they can make more money. Now, with the government deal, GM had to promise things like they were going to become more efficient. So they cut the Hummers that they were making that were losing money. And they cut the losing brands. Well, they also still cut the quality. Because let me tell you, here's a little history lesson to show you exactly what's happening to GM. Guy did a study in the 1960s. He came to the conclusion that GM was 20-something% better than Ford in the cars they were making in the 1960s. So as far as I can comprehend, GM looked at this and said, oh, we spend 20-something% more than Ford building the cars. Let's cut that. That's something we can cut. Ford's not spending that. Why should we spend that? So they did cut what they spent building the cars. Not really a smart move. Quality went down too. I do have to say, I learned how to drive on a Chevy Biscayne. It was a rolling couch. They had the bench seats. It was like driving on your living room couch down the road. But it ran and ran and ran. Big old V8 engine. They had to recall it for the motor mounts. Now, modern cars, generally, the engine sits on top of the motor mount, and then the motor mount's bolted to the frame, so it's sitting on it. In the case of this GM V8, it was actually hanging on mounts. So if the mounts broke, the motor could slam and hit the ground. Well, they built them wrong, and they had a recall. So my grandfather drove it to the Chevy dealer, and he brought it back. He brings it back, and he's laughing his head off. So I say, hey, Gramps, what are you laughing about? He says, well, you know, they're worried that the motor mount's going to break, the engine hit the ground. Here was their fix. They put a chain on each motor mount, one on each side, so that if the motor mount broke, instead of the motor slamming on the ground, you cause a wreck, have all kinds of problems, it would hang on the chain. You still couldn't drive the car that way, but they didn't have to go through the trouble of replacing the motor mounts. It would have cost them a fortune. They just put a stupid chain around them, which didn't take long to do. And if that's their idea of how to fix something right, whew, that was back in the 60s when they were doing it better than they do today. I shudder to see what they're doing today. Do a little research to see how they lied to everybody about the ignition switch. It was faulty. They knew it. They even changed the part number to try to make it look like nobody's going to notice the difference on it, even though it was a different part. They kept the old part number. And so it looked like, oh, they're just replacing them. Not that they had to redesign it. They got caught. You know, they got some kind of a fine out of it. But that just shows you the mindset that they have there. Are they thinking about you? No. They're thinking about one thing: profit. I had a customer the other day, brought me a Chevy pickup. It was 2 years old. Well, a year and a half. And the air conditioner was broken already. They didn't make the condensers right. They cracked and leaked. My 27-year-old Celica still has the original condenser and the original compressor, and it still blows cold. If they can't even make one that lasts 2 years, that says something about lack of quality. And now in an attempt to make even more money, they started making their rear ends of a lot of their trucks, the differentials, in Mexico. Turns out they kept going out too early and people couldn't figure it out. Well, I met a guy who figured it out. He pulled off the wheels and brakes and everything, took off the drive shaft and put a torque wrench to see how much resistance the rear end had. Now, it's supposed to have a certain amount of pound-foot of torque before it starts to move. He found out that as soon as he started turning it, maybe half a foot-pound or so, the wheels would start turning, meaning that the rear end was too loose. It wasn't torqued tight enough when they built it. Turns out, coming right off the factory floor, these things had the equivalent of almost 100,000 miles of wear on them, because instead of tight, they were loose. And if they're loose, they're going to have even more friction. They're going to wear even faster. I saw these rear ends go out at 45, 55,000 miles. Should have gone at least 150. But since they weren't built right in Mexico, they didn't have the quality control. Tons of them went bad. Of course, GM never admitted to any of this stuff. But in some cases, you think, oh, they make them too tight. In this case, they didn't make them tight enough. They certainly didn't move their factories down to Mexico for quality. They moved them down there for cheaper labor so they could make a higher profit. Here comes the profit margin again. They're only thinking about how can we make profit. They're not thinking about the Americans that lost their jobs that themselves would buy GM products. They're talking about how can we make them cheaper but still sell them for a lot of money. They didn't cut the prices of them or anything making them in Mexico. All they did was lower the quality and then sell them as American vehicles. And technically, you know, they're right. Mexico is part of North America, if you go by geography. And just overall, GM seems to be making mistake after mistake. Now they got that turbocharged little 4-cylinder engine they're putting in their big Silverado pickup. And of course, it's rated as better gas mileage, but those ratings are all made up anyways. They don't actually drive them around. They're on dynos. The government only checks 15% of them. 85% of them aren't even tested, so those ratings don't mean anything. You put a big load and carry stuff all the time. That 4-cylinder engine, not only is it going to get horrible gas mileage, and I've had customers get them, they actually get worse than the V8s when they tow it. They're also going to wear out faster too. Not a smart idea. Oh, but it looks so good on paper. This big truck gets this kind of gas mileage. Watch any of my videos. I've seen things that were rated at 27, and I got 20. Just driving on the speed limit on a highway, 75, and I rated at 27, I got 20. Don't ever believe those ratings. Only believe it if you get in it, you fill it up at the airport, you drive it somewhere, you fill it up again and see what the mileage is. You can't even trust the gauges on the machine. Some of these things just tell you you're getting 35 miles a gallon, but that's fake too. A lot of the speedometers don't even read correctly. They read falsely high, so it looks like you've gone more mileage than you actually have. There's a lot of tricks involved in that, and believe me, they know them all. So if you value your money, not a smart idea buying a GM, really. I certainly wouldn't buy one. The last one we had, we bought in the 1960s, and it needed maintenance every once in a while, but it was a good car overall. So that leaves us with the last, number one, the best American manufacturer, which, as you guessed correctly, is Ford. There aren't any more left. Ford's been making cars a long time, and they did not go bankrupt like Chrysler and GM did. If you checked lately, they're pretty much getting out of the car market. The only real car they're going to be making is a Ford Mustang, which is their status car, the Mustang, right? They can always sell those. People all over the world like them. I mean, as of a short time ago, you couldn't even buy in Europe. Now they're marketing them in Europe. They understand the market. They see we can't compete in the small car or even the regular car sedan market. And personally, I find that rather fascinating because over 30 years ago, I had a friend who was a bigwig at Ford. And he said to me, Scotty, we can't compete with the Japanese making these small cars. They perfect them over time. They got a labor force that cares about what they're doing. Our system is completely different. We worry about the stock price the next quarter, the next 3 months. That's what we're thinking about. And they were accused of dumping stuff in the United States, that they were dumping their little pickup trucks, not making any money so they could get a market. Well, if it was true, it worked for them because now their trucks are expensive as everyone else and people love them because they don't break. So if they did do that, hey, it was a smart move on their behalf. They got people hooked on trucks that didn't break. But when it does come with trucks, Ford is certainly king. As for Ford worldwide, 90% of their profit, 9-0, came from the sale of the F-150 and the Super Duty pickup trucks. That's where they make their money. That's where they perfect things. They perfect the pickup trucks over time. A little here, a little there. A few years back, they started to use a lot of aluminum parts, so it weighed less, so they'd be more fuel efficient. Now, don't ever think a big pickup truck is actually going to be fuel efficient, especially if you carry weight and tow stuff. It just can't be. Now, if you do like Ford cars, they're not that hard to get parts for. I mean, I worked on a 67 Mustang the other day. The starter went out. I went half a mile down the street to an AutoZone. They had one in stock for a 67 Mustang, bolted on the way he went. So you can always get parts for the things if you want. It's not like it's going to be impossible to get parts for their cars. But Ford, like Mercedes, has realized there's money in trucks. They're basically only interested in making pickup trucks and SUVs. Ford's utility vehicles, you know, one of the original was a Bronco. That was a truck base. And even though they ride and stuff, they're still kind of truck based. They're high up in the air. They don't get such high gas mileage. That's what people want. That's what they're going to build. And yeah, Ford's had some problem with those 10-speed rear-wheel drive automatic transmissions. They're very complex and they've had some problems. But I'm sure Ford will figure it out, just like Toyota had some problems with some of their Camry automatic transmissions. The newer ones don't seem to have that problem. Their engineers figured it out. And sure, Ford had that Fiasco with those Fiestas and Focuses with the dual clutch transmissions. Now they're buying the cars back. They're saying they'll fix the transmissions or they'll buy the car back. They wised up. Now it took them too many years. That was a bad thing on their behalf of pretending that it was a problem they didn't know about. When they find out through all these inter-office memos, they knew about it and they just kept selling them because it was a big money thing. Better gas mileage, more horsepower. But they weren't built correctly. Unlike the Japanese, who probably would have continued to perfect it and say, what's wrong? Okay, we'll fix that. They just decided to scrap the whole thing and not make them anymore. They still are the best made American vehicles out there because Chrysler, Fiat, and GM's floating a little bit higher than them. Ford's floating quite a bit higher than GM. Like I said, they didn't take the bailout money. They did things on their own. So now you know how I use my 52 years of working on cars to rate American car manufacturers from worst to best. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.